The dodo, a stout, curious, flightless bird that once walked the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, is one of the most famous lost species in human history. A member of the pigeon and dove family, Columbidae, it evolved in isolation into a large, ground-dwelling bird with powerful legs, a massive hooked bill, and a distinctive rounded body. Far from the caricature of a silly, slow-witted creature, the dodo's evolution, ecology, and extinction story are rich with scientific lessons about island biogeography, coevolution, and human impact on ecosystems. In this video, we'll unpack 15 hidden facts about the dodo that most people don't know, each explained in depth, grounded in biology and evidence, and ready for narration on your channel. Fact 1: Dodos weren't actually dumb. The common cultural insult dodo, meaning stupid, masks a deep misunderstanding of the bird's cognitive and behavioral biology. When scientists say dodos were not dumb, they mean this across several measurable axes of bird neurobiology, ethology, and evolutionary ecology. Comparative neuroanatomy is a place to start. Brain-to-body ratio is often used as a rough proxy for cognitive potential in vertebrates. While absolute brain size matters, it's relative brain size and the distribution of brain tissue that can indicate capacities for problem-solving, social behavior, and sensory processing. For dodos, the limited osteological and preserved soft tissue evidence suggests a brain size more comparable to large pigeons than to very small-brained animals. Pigeons display surprising cognitive sophistication. They can recognize human faces, solve multi-step foraging tasks, and use spatial mapping. If a dodo's brain-to-body proportion is pigeon-like, that implies potential for similar sensory acuity and behavioral flexibility scaled to a larger body plan. Beyond raw brain metrics, consider ecological context. The dodo lived on Mauritius, an island with seasonal variation in fruiting cycles, patchy resource availability, and a mosaic of forest and coastal habitats. Successful survival in such conditions favors behavioral strategies like efficient foraging, memory for fruiting trees, and the ability to adjust diet when key resources are scarce. These are cognitive traits, and pigeons, the dodo's closest living relatives, exhibit many of them. For example, studies on modern pigeons, Columbilivia and related species, show spatial memory for food caches, ability to distinguish and remember human and environmental cues, and social learning. If we apply principles of comparative cognition and natural selection, an evolutionary path that produced a large, ground-dwelling pigeon on an unpredictable island almost certainly selected for behavioral flexibility, not dullness. Ethological inference also comes from dodo morphology and preserved accounts. Their strong, robust bills were functionally versatile, able to handle fallen fruits, crack seeds, and manipulate objects. Robust bills often correlate with manipulative feeding strategies that require decision-making and motor control, which in turn select for neural circuitry capable of precise sensoromotor integration. Historical accounts by sailors and early naturalists describe dodos as curious and unafraid of humans rather than slow-thinking, a trait often misread as stupidity. This habituation to humans arose because, before humans arrived, Mauritius lacked mammalian predators. In evolutionary terms, the key selection pressures, predation, competition, that shaped fear responses simply weren't present, so dodos evolved reduced wariness. Reduced wariness is not cognitive impairment, it's an adaptive behavioral phenotype for a predator-free landscape. Finally, modern perspectives from evolutionary ecology emphasize that intelligence is not a single dimension but a set of adaptations tuned to an organism's niche. The dodo's sensory systems, foraging strategies, and social behavior likely match the demands of island life. If you measure intelligence only by ability to avoid humans or by anthropomorphic tasks, you miss the point. The more accurate, scientifically grounded view is that the dodo was behaviorally adapted, perhaps sophisticated, for its environment. It's the arrival of new pressures, humans, introduced predators, habitat change, that overwhelmed those adaptations, not any inherent cognitive deficiency. This reframing is important for modern conservation messaging because it shows extinction as a mismatch of evolved traits and rapid anthropogenic change, not as the failure of the organisms themselves. If you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten truths of nature, please hit subscribe to Animal Hidden Facts. Your support helps us research, produce, and share carefully sourced stories like this, and keeps our community growing so we can bring you even more surprising and meaningful discoveries. Subscribing empowers us to continue exploring the strange, beautiful, and often misunderstood lives of animals like the dodo. Thanks for being part of that journey. Fact 2. They only lived on one island, endemism of Mauritius. Endemism, the condition of a species occurring naturally only in a single geographic area, is a fundamental concept in island biology, and the dodo is a classic example. The dodo, Rhapis cucullatus, was endemic to Mauritius, an isolated volcanic island in the southwestern Indian Ocean. This confinement to a single island shaped the bird's evolutionary trajectory through processes that evolutionary biologists categorize as founder effects, genetic drift, relaxed predation pressures, and ecological release. All these drivers operate strongly on islands because populations are small, gene flow from outside populations is absent, and ecological niches are limited and often underutilized relative to continental ecosystems. Founder effect and subsequent genetic drift matter here. The ancestor of the dodo was likely a volant, flying, columbid, a pigeon-like ancestor that dispersed across oceanic distances, perhaps blown or guided by storms and island chaining behavior, to land on Mauritius. Once a handful of individuals established a breeding population on the island, their descendants experienced a genetic bottleneck. Limited genetic diversity produced a lineage more susceptible to stochastic variation, but also one that could rapidly adapt to new niches without competition. With few competitors and no mammalian predators, natural selection favored traits that would have been maladaptive on continents: loss of flight, increased body size, island gigantism, reduced wariness, and changes in reproductive strategies. This suite of changes is a textbook island syndrome. Ecological release is another crucial concept. On continents, competition and predation constrain the ways in which species exploit resources. On Mauritius, niches were open, fruiting trees had seeds and fruit likely not fully exploited by other vertebrates, ground-level food sources like fallen fruits and roots were abundant, and there were few, if any, terrestrial predators to pressure a medium-sized bird. As a result, the dodo could adopt a ground-bound lifestyle, focus on frugivory, fruit eating, and invest in body mass and bill strength rather than flight. Though selective pressures reinforced endemism, the bird became so specialized to local plant communities and ecological dynamics that its physiology, foraging behavior, and life history became tightly intertwined with that island environment. Endemism also has conservation implications. A species restricted to a single island is extremely vulnerable to localized disturbances, habitat destruction, invasive species, disease, and hunting can wipe out entire species because there are no alternative populations elsewhere. The dodo's extinction timeline illustrates exactly that vulnerability. Once humans arrived and altered the island's ecological fabric, the dodo's evolved specializations became liabilities. Its limited genetic diversity meant lower adaptive potential in the face of rapid change. Its life history traits, such as ground nesting and low reproductive compensation, increased susceptibility to introduced predators like rats and pigs. Thus, the dodo's endemism is both an evolutionary marvel, showing the power of isolation to sculpt unique life forms, and the root of its vulnerability to extinction. Fact 3. Dodos could probably run quite fast. When people picture a dodo, they often imagine a lumbering, waddling creature. But morphology, biomechanics, and the physics of locomotion suggest a different picture. Dodos had robust, muscular legs capable of efficient terrestrial locomotion, and they likely could run fast for a bird of their size. The inference of speed springs from functional morphology. Limb proportions, muscle attachment sites on bones, and the overall center of mass all provide insight into gait and propulsion capabilities. Available skeletal remains show that dodos possess thick femora and tibiotarsi relative to body size, indicators of weight-bearing and propulsive power. Strong leg bones support larger muscles, which enable rapid acceleration and sustained terrestrial movement. Biomechanics also offers a comparative approach. Flightless birds of similar body shapes, such as the modern-day flightless rail species, or larger birds like the cassowary and rhea, rely on leg-driven locomotion, and their muscularity supports sudden bursts of speed or agile maneuvering. While dodos were heavier than many of these comparators, the scaling laws of muscle force to cross-sectional area mean that even larger birds can generate substantial ground reaction forces. In addition, structural features like a relatively low and forward-shifted center of mass improve stability during running and rapid turns, which would be useful for navigating dense understory or coastal forests of Mauritius. From an ecological perspective, fast running would have been advantageous for several reasons. First, escaping aggressive interactions, whether with other dodos, competing tortoises, or birds, would require short bursts of speed. Second, foraging ecology on Mauritius involved moving between patchily distributed fruiting trees and coastal foraging spots. A bird that could cover ground quickly when resources were scattered had a foraging efficiency advantage. It could exploit ephemeral fruit falls before they spoiled or were accessed by competitors. Third, rapid terrestrial locomotion aids predator avoidance when predators are present. Although Mauritius originally lacked mammalian predators, the arrival of humans and introduced mammals created novel selection pressures where speed could have helped some individuals survive longer. Behaviorally, running capability pairs with sensory and motor coordination. Birds that run fast typically have good proprioception and the neuromuscular control to adjust stride length and limb positioning. Observations of living pigeons and other ground foraging birds show that those with strong legs have refined coordination for pecking, sudden accelerations, and sharp turns, behaviors likely mirrored in the dodo. Lastly, historical descriptions occasionally mention dodo movement that is inconsistent with pure slowness. Sailors sometimes noted quick, deliberate steps when dodos were spooked, not a complete inability to move swiftly. Altogether, anatomical evidence, comparative biomechanics, ecological logic, and contemporaneous observations converge to make a convincing case that dodos were far from stationary and likely capable of respectable terrestrial speed for a large, flightless bird. Fact 4. They nested on the ground. Ground nesting in birds is a life history strategy shaped by trade-offs between nesting safety, resource accessibility, and predation pressure. The dodo nested on the ground, a behavior that made ecological sense in Mauritius's predator-free evolutionary context and, paradoxically, contributed enormously to the bird's vulnerability after humans arrived. To understand why ground nesting evolved, we need to examine three interlinked factors: historical predator regimes, reproductive investment strategies, and habitat structure. First, predation environment. For millions of years prior to human colonization, Mauritius lacked terrestrial mammalian predators. In predator-free or low-predation ecosystems, the selective pressure to evolve elevated or concealed nests is relaxed. Ground nesting becomes favorable when the energy and time costs of building elaborate arboreal nests aren't offset by substantial survival benefits. The dodo could lay eggs directly on the substrate, often in sheltered spots like between roots or under shrubs, because the primary selective threats, foxes, wild pigs, monkeys, were absent. Under these conditions, ground nesting has advantages. It requires less energy, allows quicker access to feeding grounds, and may permit higher clutch sizes because nest construction is inexpensive. Second, reproductive strategy. Island nesting species often exhibit slow life history traits: fewer eggs, larger egg size, and greater parental investment per offspring. Ground nesting pairs with such strategy because it typically involves fewer but better provisioned offspring. In an environment where juveniles are not heavily preyed upon, selection favors investing resources into offspring robustness rather than sheer numbers. For dodos, which likely had relatively few eggs per clutch and invested significant resources into egg and chick size, ground nesting would have been a rational reproductive choice optimized for a stable, predator-poor system. Third, habitat and microclimate considerations influence nest placement. Mauritius's habitats included tropical forests with dense understory and microhabitat variation. Ground nests benefit from camouflage by low vegetation and thermal buffering from the soil, important for egg incubation in tropics where direct sun exposure can be harmful and humidity varies. The physical properties of the dodo egg and the incubating adult's body morphology might have been optimized for stable microclimate provision, further favoring ground-based nesting. However, ground nesting is a high-risk strategy if new predators are introduced. When sailors arrived, they brought rats, pigs, monkeys, and dogs, all efficient predators of eggs and chicks. These introduced mammals could access and destroy ground nests, and unlike large dodos, adults who might deter some predators, eggs and chicks had no evolved defenses. This mismatch between evolved reproductive strategy and new predation dynamics is a recurring cause of island extinctions. Thus, ground nesting was an adaptive behavior for the dodo in its original ecological context, but it became a fatal liability under rapidly altered conditions following human colonization. Fact 5. They were frugivores, fruit eaters. Labeling the dodo primarily a frugivore encapsulates a suite of anatomical, ecological, and evolutionary evidence. Frugivory, feeding primarily on fruits and fleshy parts of plants, shapes morphology, beak form, digestive physiology, and ecological interactions, seed dispersal. The dodo possessed a large, stout, hooked bill ideal for manipulating and processing various fruits, seeds, and tough plant material. This bill morphology is consistent with frugivory and opportunistic omnivory. Large gut capacity and digestive tract adaptations in frugivores allow fermentation and processing of fibrous plant tissues, while we have only limited soft tissue data from dodos. Their overall body size and fossilized gut content patterns inferred from related species indicate capacity for handling substantial fruit loads. Ecologically, Mauritius's plant community included many fleshy fruited trees and shrubs that produced seasonal fruit falls. Fruits that drop to the forest floor create a resource patch that ground foraging birds are well positioned to exploit. The dodo's terrestrial lifestyle allowed it to consume fallen fruits, crush seeds, and access fruit pulp in ways that flying frugivores might not. Moreover, fruits often contain secondary compounds and nutrients. A large-bodied frugivore can detoxify compounds more efficiently and extract calories from fibrous material through extended gut retention time. A plausible adaptation for the dodo. The role of dodos as seed dispersers further anchors their frugivorous identity in an ecological and evolutionary framework. Many plants co-evolve with their dispersers. Fruit signals, color, odor, size, and seed traits, hardness, nutritional package, reflect adaptation to the digestive machinery and behaviors of local frugivores. In island systems, these relationships can become tight because fewer disperser species exist. The historical hypothesis that the dodo was a primary disperser for several Mauritian plants, most famously the tambalacoque, Sideroxylon grandiflorum, is debated, but it illustrates the coevolutionary dynamics. Even if the tambalacoque story is simplified in older narratives, dodos likely contributed to seed movement and germination for numerous local species, either by ingesting pulp and later defecating seeds away from the parent tree, or by carrying seeds in gular pouches or adherent pulp. From a behavioral standpoint, frugivory requires memory and selective foraging. Fruiting trees are seasonal and patchy, so frugivores benefit from spatial memory, timing strategies, returning when fruits ripen, and dietary flexibility when primary fruits are scarce. Observational and comparative evidence from extant pigeons and other island frugivores suggests these cognitive and behavioral traits. Put together, morphology, digestive logic, coevolutionary plant traits, and behavioral ecology provide a coherent, scientifically grounded explanation that the dodo's primary diet centered on fruits and other plant-derived items, making it a key ecological actor in the Mauritian forest ecosystem. Fact 6. The dodo tree myth is only half true. The so-called dodo tree myth revolves around the tambalacoque, Sideroxylon grandiflorum, a large endemic Mauritian tree that was at one point feared to be functionally extinct without the dodo. The iconic story, popularized in the late 20th century, claimed tambalacoque seeds germinate only after passing through a dodo's gizzard, implying strict dependence on the extinct bird. While this narrative has been influential, modern ecological and botanical research paints a more nuanced picture consistent with mutualistic networks rather than strict obligate dependence. The original hypothesis stemmed from observations that relatively few juvenile tambalacoque trees were present in modern Mauritius, leading to the idea that a now extinct disperser, the dodo, was required to scarify the thick seed coat and create conditions for germination. Early work suggested that seeds retrieved from historical dodo gizzard contents showed enhanced germination rates. However, subsequent experimental and field studies revealed multiple processes by which tambaqui seeds can germinate without a dodo. Mechanical scarification, abrasion, passage through other species' guts, e.g., pigs, tortoises, natural weathering, and microbial action can all weaken seed coats. Moreover, the absence of many young tambaqui trees is also explicable by habitat loss, changes in soil conditions, introduced herbivores and seed predators, and competition with invasive plants, anthropogenic impacts that complicated the original inference. From an evolutionary angle, many island plants evolved traits to facilitate dispersal by the available fauna. The tambaqui fruit and seed are consistent with dispersal by large-bodied frugivores that swallow fruits whole and pass seeds intact. The dodo would have been an excellent candidate, large, ground foraging, and able to ingest moderately sized fruits. But evolutionary ecology rarely produces single-point dependencies. Rather, networks of interacting species often provide redundancy. On Mauritius, other animals, such as giant tortoises, now extinct or reduced, certain birds, and even humans and introduced mammals, could assist in seed dispersal and seed treatment. Therefore, while the dodo likely played a role in the tambaqui's life cycle, it was probably not the only mechanism allowing seeds to germinate. Recognizing the myth as half-true is important pedagogically. It preserves the legitimate ecological insight that the dodo and tambaqui were part of an interdependent system and that the loss of a major frugivore alters plant reproductive dynamics, while avoiding simplistic claims of unique codependence. Modern conservation biology favors restoring functional roles, e.g., using ecological analogs or active restoration treatments, rather than trying to recreate historical exactness. In the tambaqui's case, conservationists have successfully germinated seeds with mechanical scarification and reintroduced juvenile trees, illustrating that human intervention can partially substitute for lost ecological processes, but not without mindful habitat restoration to address the many other threats that caused population declines in the first place. Fact 7. They're basically giant pigeons. The classification of the dodo within the pigeon and dove family, Columbidae, was once controversial but is now strongly supported by multiple lines of evidence: comparative morphology, osteology, and molecular phylogenetics. This affiliation means that, despite its large, flightless form, the dodo's evolutionary origin and many biological traits are best understood as derived variations on a pigeon-like ancestral plan, essentially as giant pigeon in evolutionary terms. Historically, early naturalists were puzzled by the dodo's odd appearance and placed it among rails, ostriches, or other flightless groups. However, deeper anatomical comparisons showed structures in the skull, palate, sternum, and limb bones that align more closely with columbids. The morphology of the beak and its relation to the cranial bones, certain features of the tarsometatarsus, foot bones, and details of the pelvic region are consistent with pigeon anatomy, albeit modified by the loss of flight and increase in size. These osteological clues alone shifted scientific consensus toward a columbid affinity. More persuasive was the advent of molecular phylogenetics. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, researchers extracted and sequenced mitochondrial DNA from subfossil dodo bones. Comparing these sequences to those of extant pigeons revealed close genetic affinities to a subset of island pigeons, particularly the Nicobar pigeon, Caloenas nicobarica, and certain other Indo-Pacific taxa. The DNA evidence places dodos within a broader clade of pigeons that dispersed widely across islands, showing that volant pigeon ancestors repeatedly colonized remote islands and, in some cases, evolved flightlessness and gigantism. This pattern is similar to other island radiations, think of rails, which evolved flightless forms many times independently, and indicates that the dodo's lineage is an instance of predictable island evolution within the pigeon family. Functionally, being derived from pigeons helps explain many aspects of dodo biology. Pigeons have diverse diets, strong gizzards for grinding seeds, and social behaviors that include pair bonding and complex courtship, traits that can be co-opted and modified in an island context to produce the dodo's ecology. Additionally, pigeons' capacity for long-distance dispersal via flight explains how their ancestors reached isolated islands in the Indian Ocean in the first place. In sum, calling the dodo a giant pigeon is more than poetic shorthand. It captures the bird's phylogenetic reality and provides a framework to interpret its anatomy, behavior, and evolutionary history through the comparative biology of columbity. Fact 8. The famous skeletons are mostly composites. Museums around the world display complete dodo skeletons, but almost none of them represent a single bird. Instead, curators assembled skeletons from the bones of multiple individuals, a practice born of necessity because intact, articulated dodo skeletons are exceedingly rare. Understanding why composite skeletons are common illuminates the processes of fossilization, historical collecting practices, and the challenges of reconstructing extinct species. First, taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay and become fossilized, helps explain bone distribution. Dodo remains were often deposited in the Mauritius peat bog in Mauritius, where waterlogged, acidic conditions allowed bone preservation but also caused transport and fragmentation. The site accumulated bones across many individuals over time, leading to concentrated deposits but not articulated skeletons. In addition, early collectors in the 17th to 19th centuries intentionally broke apart or removed bones for study, trade, or shipment. Many bones were lost to private collections, sold to different museums, or discarded as mundane. Thus, the available remains are patchy and dispersed across multiple repositories. Museum practices in the 19th century also shaped composite reconstruction. When curators sought to present a complete dodo, they combined the best preserved bones from different specimens to create a convincing whole. This was a pragmatic choice. It allowed public education and scientific study despite fragmentary material. However, it also introduced uncertainties. Individual variation, sexual dimorphism, and ontogenetic, growth-related differences mean that bones from different individuals might not fit perfectly or might reflect different body sizes or proportions. Modern paleontology emphasizes transparency about composite reconstructions and uses careful documentation and, when possible, 3D digital modeling to account for variation. Composite skeletons also reflect the tragic reality that no single museum has an articulated, intact dodo skeleton because few, if any, dodos were preserved whole. Soft tissues, skin, muscles, decay quickly in tropical climates, and historical specimen preservation techniques were rudimentary. A few specimens preserved skin fragments and skeletal parts in private collections or caskets, but none constitute a fully articulated skeleton in situ. Contemporary researchers mitigate this by combining osteological, historical, and artistic sources, skeletal remains, contemporary sketches and paintings, and written accounts are integrated to reconstruct posture, plumage, and soft tissue anatomy. In short, composite skeletons are honest artifacts of limited data. They are scientifically useful but must be interpreted with caution and an understanding of their assembled nature. Fact 9. We almost lost all dodo fossils. The early history of dodo remains is a cautionary tale in scientific preservation and the consequences of neglecting natural history collections. For centuries, dodo bones were scattered, mishandled, or discarded until the discovery of the Mauritius peat bog in Mauritius provided a concentrated repository of subfossil material. But the survival of these remains was far from guaranteed. Early colonial exploitation, limited understanding of fossil importance, and environmental degradation all threatened the preservation of dodo evidence. The Mauritius site is a shallow peat bog in southeastern Mauritius that accumulated organic material over thousands of years. Under anaerobic, low oxygen, and water-saturated conditions, bones can resist immediate decay and be preserved as subfossils rather than fully mineralized fossils. In the late 19th century, naturalists and collectors recognized that the bog yielded abundant bones of extinct fauna, including dodos, giant tortoises, and other now-lost Mauritian species. Excavations in the 1860s and afterward produced concentrated assemblages that allowed scientists to assemble skeletal series and begin comparative anatomical work. Before these discoveries, many early dodo bones were lost because collectors didn't appreciate their scientific value or because specimens were damaged in transit. Some bones ended up as curiosities in cabinets of curiosities, while others were repurposed or destroyed. Moreover, peat and bog environments are fragile and subject to drainage, development, or agricultural conversion. If local land use had altered the bog before documentation, many bones could have been lost irretrievably. The late realization of the bog's importance underscores how much our knowledge of extinct ecosystems depends on a few serendipitous preservational contexts. The recovery and study of Maire aux Sanges material permitted taxonomic clarification and reinforced the dodo's uniqueness. But it also highlighted sampling biases. The bones in the bog likely represent individuals that died near a water source or were transported post-mortem, so they don't provide a complete, unbiased picture of the population structure. Modern paleontologists combine these subfossil finds with archival records, paintings, written reports, to triangulate the species' biology. The near loss of dodo fossils is a reminder that early conservation of specimens and careful curation are essential for reconstructing lost worlds and learning the lessons these extinctions offer for present-day biodiversity crises. Fact 10. They went extinct shockingly fast. The rapidity of the dodo's extinction exemplifies how quickly human arrival can transform island ecosystems. From the first reliable European encounters in the late 16th century, around the 1590s, to the disappearance of the species in the mid-17th century, commonly dated to around 1662, the dodo's extinction occurred within roughly 60 to 70 years, an extremely short time on evolutionary scales. Understanding why this decline was so precipitous requires examining the interacting drivers of mortality, reproductive failure, and habitat change. First, direct human hunting must be considered. Early sailors and settlers exploited large, naive birds like dodos for fresh meat. While the actual numbers killed by hunting alone are debated, some accounts exaggerate the ease and scale of hunting. The initial human predation certainly contributed to population reduction. More consequential, however, were the indirect effects. Sailors brought with them invasive species, rats, pigs, dogs, cats, and later monkeys, that preyed on eggs and chicks and competed for food. Ground-nesting birds, like the dodo, were particularly vulnerable to egg predation by rats and to nest destruction by pigs rooting and trampling. Second, habitat loss and alteration followed human settlement. Settlers cleared native forests for agriculture, timber, and settlements, fragmenting the dodo's habitat and reducing the availability of fruiting trees and safe nesting sites. Deforestation changes microclimates, alters plant community composition, and can increase edge effects that favor invasive species, all factors that reduce carrying capacity for a specialized endemic bird. Third, small population dynamics exacerbate decline once numbers drop. Ali effects, where reproductive success declines at low population density due to difficulties finding mates or cooperative behaviors breaking down, can push a population past a tipping point. Genetic bottlenecks and inbreeding also reduce fitness and adaptive potential. On an island with limited range, these stochastic processes can quickly lead from decline to extinction, especially when compounded by repeated anthropogenic shocks. That the dodo went from discovery to extinction in less than a century is a sobering lesson in conservation biology. The loss of ecological knowledge, how species function in their environments, and the introduction of multiple novel threats can drive species to disappear at rates far faster than natural background extinction. The dodo's fate is often invoked as a paradigmatic case study of how human activities can dismantle island ecosystems within a single human lifetime. Fact 11. Most weren't killed directly by humans. While popular narratives often depict humans slaughtering dodos en masse, scientific analyses reveal that introduced species and habitat changes likely played larger roles in the bird's extinction than direct human hunting alone. This distinction is important because it reframes the extinction from single-cause overhunting to a complex multifactorial collapse, which is a common pattern in island extinctions. Introduced predators such as rats, Ratus spp, pigs, Sus scrofa, and feral dogs were particularly devastating. Rats are efficient nest predators, small, nocturnal, and omnivorous. They can locate and consume eggs and hatchlings, decimating recruitment. Pigs root through leaf litter and dig up nests, while dogs can kill ground nesting adults and juveniles. Unlike continental species that have co-evolved with mammalian predators and developed anti-predator behaviors, cryptic nesting, sleeper vigilance, mobbing, island birds such as the dodo lacked such defenses. This vulnerability makes them easy targets for newly introduced mammals, which operate in a temporal window too fast for evolutionary adaptation. Habitat transformation compounds predation impacts. Forest clearing for settlements and agriculture not only removed nesting and foraging sites, but also created matrix environments that favor predators and competitors who thrive in disturbed habitats. For instance, rats and pigs proliferate in human-disturbed environments because of food scraps, crops, and modified landscapes. With more predators and less cover, the survivability of eggs and juvenile birds plummeted, even if adult dodos were hunted relatively little. Additionally, disease introduction and competition for resources cannot be ignored. Domestic animals and commensal species can introduce novel pathogens to which endemic birds have no immunity. Competition for food resources with introduced herbivores or omnivores can reduce available nutrition, lowering reproductive success. When multiple pressures act simultaneously, predation on eggs, reduced food, habitat loss, and disease, synergistic effects magnify extinction risk. Mathematical models and empirical studies of other island extinctions show that these combined impacts often outpace the removal of individuals by hunting alone. Therefore, the statement that most weren't killed directly by humans is not an absolution of human responsibility but a refinement. Humans set in motion ecological cascades, introducing species, altering habitat, and shifting ecological networks that caused population collapse even when humans did not directly kill every last individual. This understanding has modern implications for biosecurity, invasive species control, and habitat restoration as conservation priorities, especially on islands where ecological networks remain fragile. Fact 12. Nobody knows exactly what they looked like. Despite the dodo's fame, its exact appearance is uncertain. The remaining evidence comprises partial skeletons, subfossil bones, historical paintings, written descriptions, and preserved skin fragments from a handful of specimens. Each of these sources has limitations, and when combined they create multiple plausible reconstructions rather than a single definitive portrait. Discrepancies arise because historical artists varied in skill and perspective, specimen preservation was incomplete, and soft tissues, feathers, bare patches, do not fossilize well. Paintings made by 17th century artists are central sources but must be interpreted carefully. Some artists had direct access to live or freshly killed birds and provided reasonably accurate depictions of bill shape and body proportions. Others worked secondhand, copying earlier images or relying on sailors' accounts, leading to exaggeration or error. Color rendering is especially unreliable. Pigments change over time, artistic conventions influenced feather depiction, and artists sometimes depicted animals with imaginary plumage to make them more compelling or exotic for patrons. Skeletal evidence provides firm anchors for morphology, bill shape, limb proportions, pelvis and sternum structure, but lacks soft tissue detail. Even here, the paucity of complete skeletons and the composite nature of many reconstructions mean that proportions can be uncertain. For example, body mass reconstructions vary because estimates rely on limb bone circumference and scaling relationships that have inherent variance. Feather arrangement, color patterns, and presence of bare patches, e.g., facial skin, wattles, remain speculative because they do not leave durable skeletal markers. Preserved soft tissue fragments, skin, feathers, from museum specimens offer tantalizing clues but are rare and fragmentary. Where available, they show hints of coloration and feather structure but cannot tell the complete story. Behavioral aspects, posture, feather ruffling, and seasonal changes in plumage are completely absent from the fossil record and must be inferred from related species and ecological context. Finally, scientific reconstructions synthesize these disparate sources using comparative anatomy, digital modeling, and careful historical critique. Modern reconstructions aim for transparency about assumptions, e.g., body mass estimates, plumage hypothesis, and often present multiple plausible appearances rather than asserting a single truth. The remaining uncertainty is not a failing of science but a reflection of the limits of available evidence. We can say with confidence certain anatomical features, large hooked bill, stout legs, robust body, but many aspects of the dodo's outward phenotype will remain open to interpretation. Fact 13. The dodo wasn't fat naturally. The iconic plump image of the dodo, round belly, waddling gait, originates largely from early accounts and captive specimens, which can mislead interpretations of the bird's natural body condition. Several lines of evidence suggest that wild dodos were not as obese as some depictions portray. Rather, their wild morphology was likely more athletic and adapted to fluctuations in food availability typical of island ecosystems. First, consider the difference between wild and captive conditions. Birds in captivity, especially those with easy access to calorically dense foods and no need for energetic foraging, often become overweight relative to wild conspecifics. Historical accounts of captive dodos, kept by sailors or in menageries, describe birds that were tamer and sometimes plumper due to easily accessible food and reduced activity. Artists and observers frequently depicted captive birds or based their work on captive models. This creates a sampling bias. The most eye-catching representations emphasized corpulence, and those images entered popular imagination as the species archetype. Second, life history and ecological reasoning favor a more lean wild phenotype. Island environments commonly experience seasonal variation in fruiting and resource abundance. Animals adapted to such variability typically evolve flexible foraging strategies and can store fat when resources are abundant, but they also need the locomotor efficiency to travel between food patches. A very heavy, obese morphology would impede mobility and survival during lean periods. The strong leg bones and joint structures preserved in dodo skeletons indicate locomotor competence rather than excess mass that would impair movement. Biomechanical principles state that excessive body mass increases the metabolic cost of transport and reduces escape performance, so natural selection in a resource-variable island setting likely favored a balance between energy storage and mobility. Third, osteological indicators such as muscle attachment scars and bone robustness reflect habitual activity levels over an individual's life. Bones adapt to mechanical loading. Active, mobile animals show robust attachment sites consistent with frequent movement and muscle use. The dodo's limb bones display traits consistent with powerful leg musculature, not with bones weakened from sedentariness. These anatomical signals line up with a bird that was active, not perpetually sedentary. Finally, modern reconstructions that account for allometric scaling and ecological function produce body mass estimates that are lower than some historical caricatures. While some earlier reconstructions exaggerated mass, contemporary methods use limb-bone cross-sectional area and volumetric models to estimate realistic body weights. These modern estimates suggest dodos were sturdy but not grossly obese, well-muscled and suited to ground locomotion and foraging. Thus, the fat dodo is largely an artifact of captive observation and artistic license rather than a faithful depiction of the species in the wild. Fact 14. Scientists have sequenced its DNA. The recovery and analysis of dodo DNA represent a landmark in ancient DNA research, demonstrating that genetic information can be retrieved from subfossil remains preserved under favorable conditions. In the early 2000s, molecular biologists extracted mitochondrial DNA from dodo bones recovered in Mauritius and compared those sequences to a wide range of extant bird DNA. The results not only confirmed the dodo's phylogenetic position within Columbidae but also showcased methodological advances in extracting and authenticating degraded DNA from tropical contexts, a feat once thought unlikely given high temperatures and humidity that accelerate DNA decay. Ancient DNA, ADNA, extraction involves meticulous laboratory protocols to prevent contamination from modern DNA and requires specialized methods to amplify fragmented, chemically modified molecules. Researchers target mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, because it is present in many copies per cell, increasing the chance of recovery from degraded material. Once sequences are obtained, they can be aligned with databases of living birds, enabling phylogenetic reconstruction using molecular clock models that estimate divergence times. In the dodo's case, these analyses showed a close relationship to island pigeons, particularly the Nicobar pigeon, and supported hypotheses about dispersal from Southeast Asia into the Indian Ocean islands. Sequencing dodo DNA also opens avenues for population genetics. By comparing sequences from multiple individuals, scientists can infer past genetic diversity, demographic history, and potential bottlenecks. While the dodo's DNA work has been limited by the number of available specimens and the degraded quality of tropical adna, these studies have nonetheless provided evidence of low genetic diversity consistent with island endemics and founder events. This genetic insight helps explain the species' limited adaptive potential and susceptibility to rapid environmental change. The sequencing work also feeds ethical and philosophical debates about de-extinction. Researchers have discussed whether genetic technologies could, in principle, reconstruct lost genomes or create close proxies by editing living relatives' genomes. But de-extinction faces profound technical, ecological, and ethical challenges: incomplete genomic information, absence of appropriate surrogate species for gestation, and the question of whether resurrected organisms could be reintroduced into altered and often degraded native habitats. Thus, while the dodo's DNA provides invaluable scientific knowledge and exciting methodological progress, the sequencing primarily contributes to evolutionary understanding and conservation lessons rather than an imminent pathway to literal resurrection. Fact 15. Some say the dodo isn't entirely gone. Ecological legacy. Although the dodo species is extinct, its evolutionary and ecological legacy endures in several ways, prompting the notion that the dodo isn't entirely gone. This legacy includes genetic and ecological traces in descendant species, the persistence of co-evolved plant-animal interactions, even if altered, and the role of the dodo as a symbolic and practical influence in modern conservation biology. From a phylogenetic perspective, the dodo's closest living relatives, such as the Nicobar pigeon and other Indo-Pacific columbids, carry the genetic heritage of the lineage that produced the dodo. While these relatives are not direct descendants in the sense of linear ancestry, they share common ancestors. They preserve portions of the genetic toolkit that once existed in the dodo's lineage. Comparative genomics among columbids can reveal shared genomic elements related to metabolism, immune function, and developmental pathways. In that sense, the dodo's evolutionary story is embedded in living taxa. Ecologically, the dodo's influence persists through plant species that evolved in the context of dodo-mediated processes. Even if direct dependencies are overstated, as with the Tambalakok myth, many Mauritian plants adapted to dispersal by large frugivores. Some plants may still rely on the ecological roles formerly played by dodos and giant tortoises. Contemporary conservationists sometimes use ecological analogs, introduced or reintroduced species that can fulfill similar functional roles, such as tortoises acting as seed dispersers to restore ecosystem processes. These restoration activities demonstrate that the functional niche of the dodo can be partially reinstated, creating a living echo of the extinct species' ecological role. Culturally and scientifically, the dodo's legacy is immense. The tragedy of the dodo helped catalyze early conservation thinking and continues to serve as a powerful emblem of human-driven extinction. This symbolic legacy influences policy, education, and conservation funding in ways that can protect other endangered species. For example, the dodo's story is often used to communicate the urgency of invasive species control, habitat protection, and biosecurity, practical lessons derived from the dodo's extinction that still save species today. Finally, conservation hybrid approaches, using genetic information from related species to guide captive breeding, habitat restoration, and invasive species management, reflect ways the dodo's genetic and ecological shadow informs contemporary actions. So while the bird itself is gone, aspects of its biology, the ecosystems that shaped it, and the lessons it provided persist in living systems and human efforts to steward biodiversity. In this broader sense, the dodo's influence continues, not as an individual species roaming Mauritius, but as a multidimensional legacy embedded in genomes, ecosystems, and conservation consciousness. Thank you for watching Animal Hidden Facts. Don't forget to subscribe, support our channel, and stay tuned for more amazing insights in our next video.